entire 9-year career there. What are you hearing about this?
Well, obviously, there are questions about his future. And it started when they signed Travis Achan, the former Travis Etienne running back from Jacksonville, who corrected everybody and said that the proper pronunciation of his last name is Achan. Who knew, but it is. So they have now added Travis Achan to their backfield, and they paid him starting running back money, which leaves Alvin Kamara at a disadvantage in terms of resource management, as Mickey Loomis would say. That's code for saying we can't pay Alvin Kamara what we think he's worth, nor what he wants right now. And so Kamara obviously would like to be in New Orleans, but also recognizes that they're paying another running back considerably more than him, which raises questions about his future in New Orleans. Now, there was a thought after they made that free agent move that potentially they could look to trade Kamara. Nothing's happened yet. This is a fluid situation.
All right. Listen, season low, 471 rushing yards, 1 touchdown. But again, Travis Achan, that's what we're going to be calling him this season, per him. All right. OTAs also underway in Vegas this week. This is really fun. Come on. I love this. Kirk Cousins, Fernando Mendoza, Step Brothers. Oh, my gosh. That was so funny. Cousins, of course, 15 years older than the #1 overall pick. Some folks have remarked they're kind of a little bit alike. I don't know, in terms of their quirky personalities, but that was epic. Raiders, no primetime games, by the way, for the first time since 2010, despite the fact that they have Mendoza. Tim, looking at their schedule, ideally, what's the best case scenario, do you think, for Mendoza to get his first start?
I think roughly halfway through the season, when they go on the road to play the Jets, would be what I would be targeting. And so that's week 8. Unfortunately for Mendoza, the gauntlet of teams that he would play after that would have some pretty good defenses. But you get about a month to be the starter, then have a bye week, to be able to just kind of evaluate things. I think that's the best scenario, because I do think, they'll want Cousins to start the season, and Cousins will be prepared to come in and, have complete command of the offense right away. It would be good for Mendoza to see that. But I will maintain that it is always easier for a guy to get better playing than it is for a guy to watch a guy, play. And so I think ultimately at some point you've got to make the move, and that's why I think it's week 8.
Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate, I think, for timing purposes, that the beginning of the season, actually you have some easier defenses than the end, as Tim alluded to. The Broncos, 2 times later in the year is not great. So I wouldn't be surprised if Raiders fans are a little bit disappointed and they want to see Mendoza earlier, and perhaps Kirk Cousins holds him off for a while. But I do think, I agree with Tim, ultimately we will see him, and frankly, I think earlier is better.
All right, let's go to L.A. now. Remember, there was a question at the start of the season, would Matthew Stafford actually be playing last year? Not only did he, from the start, he won MVP, and you are going to see Stafford and the Rams in primetime a lot this season. 7 primetime games in 2026, tying the most in history, including, by the way, for their first 5. They kick it off in Australia against the Niners in week 1. John Harbaugh's Giants in week 2 on Monday Night Football. They are all over the place. So apparently the schedule makers think this is going to be one of the better teams and more entertaining in the league. Mina, is there any concern, though, for this team?
This isn't a concern. I just think last year you're going to see something tested this season that was their biggest problem, which was the pass defense. From week 10 on through the playoffs, this team gave up the 3rd most explosive passes in the NFL. I think half of those were to Jackson and Jigba, who, of course, they're going to have to face, at least twice during the regular season and then potentially beyond then. Now, we all know that the Rams took a great effort to address this weakness, trading for Trent McDuffie and signing Jalen Watson from Kansas City. But I think that's going to be what's tested by this schedule. Is this pass defense improved after what we saw last year?
And listen, that's an issue. I think if things don't work, for the Rams, there'll be a lot of questions of, listen, Stafford's coming off an MVP season. Why didn't you go get more help? And look, Devontae Adams had a remarkable year, but it was in a very specific role. And I don't know that will be easily duplicated. And so I do think that, putting better players around him when you kind of have a Super Bowl ready team, it's a little surprising to me that that's not the direction that they went. And so now when you look at investing in, a backup quarterback who the hope is you won't play, rather than adding depth on your roster where you were getting older, just take a look at the Chargers. Look what happened to them. Because of injuries up front, it basically collapsed their season. Didn't matter how well Justin Herbert played. I think that's kind of the feeling I have a little bit when I think about the Rams and what they've did to set up this season.
And you talk about taking Ty Simpson, Tim. The player that they probably passed up there was Mekhi Lemon. So Mekhi Lemon could have easily been a Ram. He could have been a Steeler, but wound up as an Eagle, and that will be worth watching here as this and other seasons unfold.
Yeah, and here's the NFC West, first division since 1970 that had 3 12-win teams. All right, this is a close second. They're followed by the Steelers and the Browns, a distant fourth to win the division. Steelers, as you know, won last year for the first time since 2020. Ravens won it all in 23 and 24. Mina, so the Ravens' first 7 games are against teams that actually missed the playoffs. What are your expectations under their new OC, Declan Doyle?
I think there's going to be pressure on this offense to hit the ground running despite all the changes because of the opponents. Looking at the schedule early on, I felt like most of these defenses outside of, I would say, Cleveland within the division are ones that they really should be able to move the ball on. Defenses themselves undergoing a lot of change, especially those first 8 weeks. I do have some concerns about the interior of the offensive line, the loss of Tyler Linderbaum, but I do wonder if Declan Doyle, bringing that offense over from Chicago, which will be more under center, outside zone, can find ways to perhaps compensate for that. I also think you're going to see a lot more play action. The Ravens were below average in play action rate last year. Some of that had to do with game script, but I do think that needs to be a core part of this offense. But yeah, Hannah, looking at that schedule, I felt, I would say, optimistic about this offense, even with all of the change.
Yeah, I mean, listen, pass rush was a problem. Pass protection was a problem. Tim, I mean, last year you had the Ravens on paper, and that didn't translate to the field. Do you agree with the odds makers that they're the favorite to win the division? How do you see it?
I do. There's significant change around the rest of the division, and the Bengals haven't exactly been an organization that's shown consistency. And then you think about it, Lamar Jackson, it was just 2 seasons ago, he threw 41 touchdown passes. His development as a passer, I think, has been so significant, and then he's still an absolute threat as a runner. And so I think when kind of as Mina points out, you look at the beginning part of the year, the idea that the offense could be off and running, I think is significant. And then you just look at the, additions on the offense and the defensive side of the ball at the line of scrimmage. Look, Trey Hendrickson has been an outstanding player in the league and in the division. I think that's a massive addition. I think John Simpson helps right away at guard. I don't think they're done addressing the interior offensive line. I could easily see them adding a center somewhere, where most likely they will add a center, as they look around the league and teams start to see their offensive lines take shape. And so I think that they're going to be okay, and I think scheme will help. And then I think the fact that Lamar, and the added element with him as a runner helps. So I do think that they are the favorite. I think they've addressed the right areas, and I think they're going to have to meet expectations, because you don't move on from John Harbaugh and think, okay, we're going to rebuild for a couple of years, when Lamar Jackson is just a couple of years, removed from having a dominating, season, throwing 41 touchdown passes.
Oh, you look at a guy like Jesse Minera, so many relationships up and down, right? The organization, you would think that this would be as seamless a transition as possible under the circumstances, moving on from a longtime head coach. All right, meanwhile, we are moving on to the NFC North, where the Vikings need to figure out their quarterback situation. Bringing in Kyler Murray, his last season just riddled with injury. He played a career-low 5 games. J.J. McCarthy, he was the starter for the most part down the stretch as they won 1-5 to end the seaon after a terrible beginning. But he finished with the worst completion percentage in the NFL. And here's Vikings All-Pro wideout Justin Jefferson on the quarterbacks.
Just competition for real. Just to see who's going to be that last man standing, who's going to be that dog, who's going to be that leader to carry us throughout this season. Because that is definitely a missing piece that we're looking for, and something that, is very important to our team, which is the quarterback spot. So, just seeing that competition battle, seeing those guys come every single day leading the team and try to spark, especially the offense, is definitely something I'm looking forward to. And just going out there and just connecting with any quarterback that's going out there and throwing the ball, that's the main important thing this training camp.
If there was any doubt that this was a competition, I think Justin Jefferson took care of that there. Adam, what's their approach to determining their starter?
Well, Hannah, they say it's an open competition, and J.J. McCarthy hasn't been healthy, and he'll have something to say about this. And look, we've seen quarterback revival stories in recent years, from Sam Darnold to Daniel Jones to Baker Mayfield. It seems like there's one revival quarterback story every year. That story could be Kyler Murray this year. It also could be J.J. McCarthy, who we still haven't seen come into his own. The Vikings have a couple of options right now, but there are a lot of people who believe that Kyler Murray handpicked that situation in Minnesota, that he could win that starting quarterback job and get his career back on track the way that some of these other quarterbacks that we mentioned before also have in previous seasons.
Well, including, Sam Darnold right there in Minnesota. Tim, do you see this competition playing out in what way, in terms of what each guy brings to the table and really, frankly, what this team needs?
Well, both guys are really talented. What the team needs is somebody to take charge and be a leader. That's basically what what Jefferson was saying there. And really, when you hear what he was saying, look, it's a missing piece. I think that's a really bad sign for J.J. McCarthy, because he's been there for 2 years. So to say that there's a missing piece when he's been there, is a bit of an indictment in terms of how the building feels about him. To me, this feels like the Indianapolis Colts pretty quickly saying, we need to bring some competition in for Anthony Richardson. And they did that with Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones was quickly named the starter. It feels like we're headed in that direction. I'm not saying that they're just going to anoint the job to Kyler Murray, but I think the admission that you needed to bring legitimate